YouTube, it's Charlie from Reader Turned Writer, and today I am doing a writer's perspective review of The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. I first read The Hunger Games when I was in high school. I think I was 17 years old, just about to turn 18, and I devoured them. I remember bringing home the first book from my school library. I was done with work, ate dinner, and around 6 o'clock I started reading, and I didn't put it down until I finished it at like 2 in the morning. So it was definitely a binge read for me, and I really loved it. I haven't revisited it since then, so it was really fun for me. It's glaring. It was really fun for me to reread it as an adult, and now that I have learned a lot more about writing, what makes a good fictional book, craft, story structure, all of those different things that I have been learning about, it was fun to see what she had done well and maybe not as well in this book. This will, by nature, have a lot of spoilers in it, so if you haven't read it yet, but you're going to and you don't want spoilers, then definitely you'll want to stop watching now. I'm also trying a little bit of a new structure with this book, doing kind of a writer's take on the book, but very much laid back, no bullet page, just kind of a review type structure, me talking to the camera. So let me know down in the comments below if you like this kind of video, and also let me know in the comments below what your take on The Hunger Games, especially if you're a writer and you have critiques or things that you really love that she did well. Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to have that discussion or hear your thoughts on it. And just remember that I am still learning, I am on my writing journey, and I want to use these kinds of books that have been published to look to see what was done well and not as well, so I can learn to be a better writer. And I'm not at all an expert, but I am trying to learn as best I can, and so I hope that what I am learning is helpful to you, and I would love to hear what you're learning as well so that it can be helpful to me. So I'm going to jump in now, so I'm setting the book down because I don't want to hold it during the entire review. And I have a lot of thoughts, and I am just going to kind of talk about them as I think of them. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was writing style, because this is a big deal for some people. Now, I see Suzanne Collins' writing style as being a little more simple. It's not flowery or like a classic or literary or anything like that. It's very accessible, and I actually think that's a very big plus for her book, because I feel like her whole goal of the book was to create an enjoyable experience for a common reader, and so making it accessible I feel like was a very good choice, and I actually really like her writing style. I actually prefer more simple writing styles to flowery or descriptive, and so it was definitely my kind of writing style. I also think that it flows really well, although I have heard that because it is more simple, it's not very distinct. There's nothing that sets it apart from other people's writing style, and some people see that as making it mediocre. I think it was a good choice for the story that she was telling. One of the main things that I noticed during this read through was the foreshadowing. As I have been learning about foreshadowing and noticing it, or the lack of it in books that I read, I have been realizing that foreshadowing is one of the most important craft skills that you can learn as a writer, because foreshadowing things properly can make or break the book. It can, if you don't foreshadow something properly, it can draw readers out of the story. It can make it feel awkward to them, and they might not even realize why. And it can make it feel like you're just making things up on the spot rather than having like a cohesive story that you're just telling. And if you are interested, then you can look out for a video on that next month, because I really want to do a video on foreshadowing. So I think that she did an amazing job. One way that you can foreshadow is by having like the same event happen. Like if there's a big event, you can have the same thing happen but on a smaller scale beforehand. And she does this really well with the training. She has like 3 days of training before they actually go into the games. And so then a lot of things happen. Alliances are formed, and she foreshadows a lot of the people's skills. Like think about Peeta. He spends a lot of time at the camouflage center and talks about how he learned to bake cakes and would always decorate the cakes and stuff. And then in the games, that actually saves his life, and it's a big part of the story, but it was foreshadowed so well beforehand that it feels really natural that he would do that. And she does that with a lot of their skills beforehand. One of the things that she does, even just to give you like the right feel, is on the way to the Hunger Games, Katniss tastes blood in her mouth because she bites her cheek, and that gives us the correct like atmosphere going towards the game. Well, as Katniss is being lifted up into the games, she bites her cheek because she's nervous, so she's chewing on her cheek, and she tastes blood again right as she's coming into the games. And like, that is such a brilliant way to foreshadow like what's going to happen in the games, how much blood is going to be there and stuff. She just does a brilliant job. And the first book has a lot of foreshadowing for the future books even, which I'm not going to go into a lot of stuff with the other books, but the foreshadowing in the first book was just so good. I just couldn't help but notice it all throughout the first book. One example is Rue. Rue reminds her of her sister, Katniss's sister. And Rue in the games for Katniss was kind of like her sister, Prim. And she dies. Well, Prim ends up dying in the third book. When Rue is dying, Katniss actually calls Rue Prim on accident. And the whole scene with Rue and everything, and how often she thought that Rue was like Prim and everything like that, really set up for me how Prim ends up dying in the book. And it just felt very much like a big foreshadow moment for me. Moving on to another point, I asked myself, do I care at the beginning of the book? Because that is a really big thing. You want the reader to really care about your character. So for me, the answer is absolutely. I care so much about Katniss. Katniss has a lot of hardships, and she's the underdog. Like, not only is she from the districts, which is already being an underdog compared to the capital, but she is in District 12, which is like the lowest of lows, the most underdog district that there is. But she faces those hardships with an attitude that is not whiny or complaining or, you know, annoying. She faces them with grace, and that always endears me to a character. But she's also highly skilled. She is very capable, which is a tactic that people will use because we really like capable people. So she's very good at the bow, at setting traps, she's able to survive, she's very good at surviving, and that ties in with her character arc, which is also important. She has some really close friendships and people who really like her, and she's respected at the Hall where she goes to trade. Because other people see her in a positive light, we as the reader also see her in a positive light, and because she has people that she really cares about and loves and protects, and you know, she's protecting Prim and her mother and taking care of them and all of that, we really like her because of that, because we see her as a kind person for doing that. She also has a Save the Cat moment. Save the Cat was named that because Blake Snyder talked about how to make your character likable, you should have them save a cat or do something nice for someone else. And Katniss has one of those in her catalyst where she saves Prim, and that is like the most Save the Cat moment that you could get. Moving on to story structure, I think that Collins really nailed story structure. All of the beats are there, they all do what they're supposed to do, and I feel like they were all executed on really well. So for example, at the very beginning of the book, we see how terrible Katniss's life is, and we get to see like what her everyday life looks like, but in a really interesting way. What a lot of beginner writers will do is they'll show like them waking up and brushing their teeth and doing everyday things, but it's really boring because it's like, why? But she wakes up and she goes hunting for food, and we get to see the world building, and we get to see the tension that's there. And her everyday life is really interesting to us, and it's very well done. Her catalyst is huge. We're left thinking, when Prim's name is called and she switches places with her and everything, we are left thinking, you know, how is she ever going to come back from this? Her second act is full of struggles and ups and downs for her. Her All Is Lost is devastating. When Rue dies, everyone, the reader is devastated for her. She is devastated, and it is a very touching moment, and it has the taste of death. No, the touch of death? Whatever, how it's supposed to have death around it. I can't remember what it's called. And of course, her Dark Night of the Soul is her sing to Rue as she dies, and putting the flowers on her and everything, and that's an act of rebellion, and she lifts her fingers as an act of rebellion. And she has the epiphany there that, you know, for her character arc, which I'll talk about later, she has her epiphany there that it's not all about survival, and she really understands what Peeta was talking about when he didn't want to lose himself in the games and stuff. It's a good Dark Night of the Soul because it not only has plot stuff, but it also has character arc stuff. Her Storm the Castle is trying to survive with Peeta together now since they changed the rules, and then the Hightower surprise when they change the rules again and they're supposed to die, and they end up using the berries to defy the capital or whatever. The only thing is the closing image is supposed to show kind of like that things are better now than they were at the beginning and mirror that, and I didn't really feel that it was very mirrored. And I also just, it obviously isn't a very happy ending. Things are terrible for her at the end of the book. So I don't know exactly what to say about the closing image there. It is a good lead-in for the sequels, so there's that. I guess while I'm talking about the ending, I'll just hurry and talk about the ending, because I actually think it was a good ending for a first book, even though it's kind of depressing. It's very realistic, and it ties up the main plot of the first book really well, but it also leaves open a lot of questions and a lot of loose ends, and it leaves those open well enough that not only can the reader left filling in blanks and left with like an open world, but it segues really well into the sequel. You can't really talk about the Hunger Games without talking about tension, because that is like the one thing that everybody would agree it does really well, is it keeps you hooked really well. The tension is so high in this book in so many different areas. So there's like the political tension between the districts and the capital, and you see that in a very personal way as Katniss is taken to the capital and has to interact with all these capital people as she is getting ready to go into the games, and you see it in like the way that the districts are treated and talked about, and just the fact that they don't even have enough food and they're sent to the Hunger Games and all of that. So the political tension is really well portrayed and felt for the reader, because we get to see it, how it personally affects our main character and the people that she loves. There is a lot of tension around Katniss and whether she's going to survive, and that is really heightened by all of the people, especially Prim, who want her to come home, and like they really build up to it, like talking about it in the interviews, and Peeta trying to get her to survive as well, and all of that stuff really heightens the tension, and it builds throughout the book as we find out more and more about whether or not she'll survive. And of course there's the romantic tension, like the whole love triangle thing where Gale, it's pretty obvious to the reader at the beginning of the book that Gale likes Katniss, but then there's also like the, you know, all of her conflicting feelings with Peeta, and she goes back and forth, and she doesn't actually know what his ulterior motives are. But as a reader, I never thought that he had really bad ulterior motives. I always thought that he was actually in love with her, and so there's those, and then she's not sure how she feels about him, even if he does have good motives, and all of that, and how she has to pretend to be in love with him to get food and stuff in the games. All of that adds an increasing tension throughout the book. And then of course during the games there's a lot of tension as they're fighting, and she's put in these situations that are like immediately dangerous for her, and she has to figure out a way to get out of them. And even when she's proactive, there's a lot of things that go wrong, and it has a lot of tension that really builds throughout the book until you just really can't put the book down when you're reading it. Even as a reread, I didn't want to put the book down. I'm going to talk about two final kind of big things that are a part of basically every book, but especially like a sci-fi dystopian book like this. So the first one is character arc or development. This one is a little bit trickier, but I think the character arc is okay. I see her character arc as being about survival, and how at the beginning of the book she thinks that survival is the most important thing, and she has to learn throughout the book that staying true to herself is actually more important than just surviving. Peeta is her B-story character here, where you can see he already believes that staying true to yourself is more important than surviving, like even when he's on the roof with her before they go into the games. His goal in the games is to not just survive, but to make sure that he stays true to who he is, and she doesn't understand that. But then as she's in the games, and especially with Rue, she starts to really realize what he meant, and she realizes that she wants to have the same goal and works towards that. And then her final moment at the end, during the Hightower surprise, she's given the choice of letting Peeta die or killing herself so that the capital can have a Hunger Games victor, or defying the capital and potentially risking her life so that she can stay true to who she is, which is trying to save both her and Peeta. That's how I see the character arc. I have heard arguments that are actually well-founded that the Hunger Games doesn't really have a character arc, and I can see that because Katniss doesn't really change as a person very much from beginning to end. She's kind of the same person going home as she is at the end, and makes a lot of the same choices. And I know some people think that that is a really downside to the Hunger Games. I've also heard the argument for a flat character arc, where she has a flat character arc and the world around her changes. I think that's more true for like the series as a whole than the first book, because I think the series as a whole, she does change the world around her more than the world changes her. But I do think that the first book, I think that the character arc is there, it's just not as strong, and so that might be a part of the book that wasn't as well done. I also think that the character arc that she has works really well with the rest of the book. It's very cohesive, and I think that the story works well with a weaker character arc because of the other elements in the book. Okay, and then we're going to end kind of on a positive note with world building, because the world building is really cool. Like I said before, we get to see a lot of political tension, and we get to see a lot of the structure of the politics and how that directly affects the people that live in the world, and like very see it personally through Katniss's eyes and the people that she loves. I do think the history of the world could have been like, it wasn't very fleshed out, the history of the world, but I also think that for the story it actually was good that it wasn't more fleshed out, because I think that if you had gone into too much detail with it, that it could have slowed the pace of the story, and I think that what she was going for was a very fast-paced, tight-knit plot. I definitely thought that we got to see a tip of the iceberg world building here, and that it was very naturally woven into the story, so the pace of the book was kept up as she showed us different parts of the world and interesting little things about the world. And it was a fun and unique and usually messed up world, so it was really interesting to read about. One of the things I love most about the world building is that we get to see how prejudiced the districts and the capital are against each other, and the people in them are prejudiced against each other, but we as the reader are not as prejudiced because we get to know both sides through Katniss's eyes. And even as it moves on to the third book, that comes up more with Katniss, where she is not angry at like the people who get her all ready, whatever they're called, the people who like do her makeup and stuff. And I think that's a really interesting thing that we get to see in Hunger Games, that we get to see the prejudice without actually feeling all of the prejudice for one side. We get to see both sides there, and I thought that was cool. I know one thing that some people don't love about the world building is that we are limited in what we see because we're seeing everything through Katniss's eyes, and she doesn't get to see a lot. I think that's actually a plus of the book, but it kind of depends on your view and what you like in books and what you wanted from the book. But I think, again, that it supports the fast-paced, tight-knit plot that Collins was going for. But I definitely loved all of the glimpses that we got to see of the interesting world that Collins created. Okay, so those are most of my thoughts. I hope I didn't forget anything. But again, let me know in the comments below what you think of Hunger Games and the way that it is written, or let me know from the perspective of a reader what you thought of Hunger Games. If you like this video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe for lots of writing content. Thank you so much for watching my video. I will see you in the next one.